today's Legislative Forum, hosted by the School Board Legislative Committee. On behalf of Bloomington Public Schools, I wish to thank my fellow school board members and Bloomington legislators for joining us today, as well as the Superintendent Les Fujitaki and the members of the Cabinet. We know this is a very busy time of year for you, legislators, so we appreciate your valuable time today. We also wish to express our deepest gratitude to each of you for supporting education bills last year that truly benefited public education and our school district. We appreciate your leadership and your continued support. At this time, I'll turn the facilitating duties over to Chair of the Board Legislative Committee, Nellie Corman.
Thank you. Well, good morning. On behalf of the Legislative Committee, I'd like to welcome everybody to today's forum. Present with us today are our Legislative Forum guests, Senators Melissa Franzen, Melissa Halverson-Wickland, Representatives Paul Rosenthal, Linda Slocum, and Ann Linchesky. School Board Legislative Committee members Tom Bennett and Don Steiger, and Nellie Corman, and I'm the chair of the Legislative Committee. We have for today, For today, we have a structured 90 minutes forum to allow for our legislators to provide brief updates on legislation that they have authored or co-sponsored. We're also going to be hearing from staff experts on proposed legislation that we support and desire to benefit what we're doing in Bloomington. Throughout today's forum, we're going to invite legislators and school board members to ask questions, make comments, and engage in a dialogue about legislation that is shaping this year's legislative session. First, I'd like to take a couple of minutes to share this year's school board legislative priorities. So as you can see in the screen, for adequate sustainable funding, we support increase in the general education formula allowance sufficient to cover the annual cost increases and adequate funding for special education programs. In pre-K, funding of programs that prepare children for kindergarten. Commitment to educational research, support qualitative research on instructional leadership strategies that lead to higher learning for rates for all students with particular focus on achievement gap reduction. Reduction on student testing, support legislation to replace Minnesota Comprehensive Assessments, MCAs, with measures of academic progress, MAP. How did I go back? Okay. So this is our legislative priorities for this year. Then at this time, I would like to invite our legislators to introduce yourselves and to provide us with a brief update on any bills that you have authored or co-sponsored. So I think we're going to start to my left with Representative Linda Slocum.
Do I need to pull this close?
Yeah, don't be afraid to pull
Maybe a
that
little
one.
bit.
Is it
Yeah.
fine? It's fine. Okay, things that I authored or co-authored or chief authored. There's a lot of education bills swirling around the Capitol, some of which I think are really, at least at the House level, some of which are really good bills, some of which I think are almost detrimental. Anyway, I chief authored that a student member should be required to be on the school board. Do you have a student member on your school board? I don't believe you do, but hey, we're talking about students, folks, so they should probably be represented, and I'm the chief author of that bill. I also chief authored a comprehensive vision exam required for pre-kindergarten kids, because there are, I think children are getting slotted as special ed early when vision is more of the problem. So I authored that. We'll see what happens with it. I also authored consent curriculum. I went up and visited with the Sexual Violence Center, and they are working on what does yes mean, what does no mean, and making it very, very clear. And they're working curriculum for middle school that's appropriate for middle school, and for high school that's appropriate for high school and college. But that's not your problem. Anyway, I authored a bill to have them work with the MDE, Department of Ed, to develop this curriculum and then put it out for school districts to use. It's not mandated, so it will be up to you. I co-authored the National Board Certified Statewide Coordinator to serve on the Board of Teaching, to encourage teachers to get certified, nationally certified, because it affects teacher quality. And I think that that would be a really good thing to have someone on that board and traveling the state, meeting with school districts to facilitate the national certification process with teachers. I also co-authored flexibility in early childhood and school readiness funding, because sometimes funds are needed more in one area than another area, so some flexibility that districts could move funds back and forth. Oh, here's a good one. I co-authored this one. Districts would be allowed to compensate effective or highly effective teachers when they teach in hard-to-staff areas. So, and a financial incentive to get really highly qualified and very effective teachers in areas where it's harder to staff. I also co-authored a PSEO incentive program to add more money so school districts are reimbursed for textbooks and supplies for school districts as an incentive for school districts to participate in PSEO. Also, school-linked mental health grants. And what I'd really like to see is I would love to see wraparound services in school districts that where there are counselors, social workers, mental health professionals, and we can catch kids early and help kids and get them on the right track early when they're suffering. And make no mistake, they are suffering. And we are like 49th in the country with school counselors. And that's, not too cool. Anyway, with that bill is money. I also co-authored a bill for school counselors and support staff to add, and there's money with that too. So it's not just a mandate, but there's money following it. It's interesting with a surplus. Everybody wants the money. And that's, I serve on K-12 Ed Finance, Commerce, and Taxes. Those are my committees in the House. It's very interesting in the House this year. I'm having my first bill heard next week, which isn't so great, because it's deadlines. But I've got bills, I've put them in, I've lobbied to have them heard, and the partisanship is certainly working not in my favor. And I've always, gotten along with both sides of the aisle. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. It's an interesting thing. Do I say?
No, yeah, speak. I want to ask you about the first bill you talked about, the student school board member. It's something that I'm very much interested in, and something that we're actually looking at potentially adding a couple to our school board. Is there a companion in the Senate, or do you see this traction in this and it getting passed this year?
Yes, I do. I think this will pass this year.
Okay.
Okay,
Good. And this
thank
is
you.
your carrying it in the Senate? Nice.
I'm sorry, we're going to continue here this direction, and I'll give everybody an opportunity to introduce themselves, and then we'll ask questions after that.
At the end, we're asking
Thank you.
questions. Okay.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here on an early morning on a Saturday. We just finished, as Representative Slocum just mentioned, our first deadline, policy deadline in the Senate and the House, and it's been a really busy week. Bills have to go through another policy deadline next week, so the next 2 weeks have been really rough, but at least a little different dynamic in the Senate, being that we still, and the DFL still holds the majority, so being member of the party, it makes it a little easier, but still, we still have to lobby for our bills to get heard, and some of them still are controversial for members. Not everything is on party lines, so we still have that dynamic going on. I used to serve in the Education Policy Committee for my last 2 years, my first 2 years in the Senate. This year, with the changes in the House composition, I moved to the Higher Ed Committee. So I think I have the best of both worlds, because 2 of my first years will be in early ed, all K through 12, and then my next 2 years will be in higher ed, and certainly the link between those 2 areas is certainly something that is helpful to see it as a continuum versus in silos. So it's been helpful to have that background to begin with. In my first 2 years, I did focus a lot on early childhood education. One of the things that I chief authored my second session was the supplemental budget bill for the scholarships bill for early childhood education. We did receive additional funding for that, and I've been meeting with districts, and certainly it's a new program. It's the whole coalition with Mini Minds, and it's been moving ahead slowly. We know we've only met about 7% of the need in the state. We want to continue to grow that. As you know, right now, the governor's proposed a lot more funding in early childhood education, which is fantastic, on the all-day preschool side. So my focus will still be on the targeted side, even though I do support that effort. Long-term, I think we have limited resources and a lot of competing interests. I also serve as vice chair of the Health and Human Services Committee, and it's a budget year, so that's a lot of my focus and attention has been there too, making sure that we fund not only the education side, but all the wraparound services. As Representative Slocum mentioned, there's a bill as well in the Senate that working on wraparound services for schools that encompasses mental health, encompasses other areas of holistically looking at a family. So I'm supportive of that. I'm not carrying that bill, but certainly see it from different angles of how we have to not only support teachers, schools, but also the family, and we're trying to make those connections. So I do not I'm not chief authoring the bill for scholarships this year. That would be Senator Dick Cohen, who's the chair of the Finance Committee, which he decided to carry that, and certainly as being chair of the Finance Committee, I think that's a good sign that we're having a really serious discussion about early ed. And but I am co-author of that bill. We'll continue to support the early childhood education scholarships. Just recently, in the last week or so, Representative Brian Winkler and I met, and Representative Fresha in the House as well. We're working on trying to figure out how to best approach early ed. There's a lot of momentum. We've talked about it. We know it's the foundation for kids to be ready for K. We know that schools are being rated for school readiness efforts too. So how do we complement that? How do we move the needle in that direction to get our kids ready? And the governor's been mentioning how we've been struggling with the best approach of how to split the funding, or if you will. So our bill is just looking at the approach. What if we split it evenly between the interests? So whether it's school readiness, whether it's the scholarship model, or whether it's the CCAP model, which is under HHS, and that's the Child Care Assistance Program, to allow families to be able to go to work and be able to afford child care. So that's also the part of that continuum that I'm talking about. And we're trying to put a proposal together to be able to look at it and have all the stakeholders benefit from putting their best foot forward in these different approaches. So we maybe focus less on fighting over the pot and maybe share the pot, if you will, and that's easier said than done. But certainly one of our bills is to move in that direction, and to also give support to get the early childhood education programs rated with the parent-aware system that we have. So that's what I have for education policy, but again, linking that, I also have a bill on the child care side with a child care tax credit, and also linking it to the parent-aware system. Louisiana has a model that's similar to that. Certainly, we know that our state is third or fourth most expensive in child care, and we know that kids learn, well, we knew this, but now we have research to back it up, that is the first foundation to get ready for K in the first few years of life. So we want to make sure that we are preparing our kids as early as possible and giving the tools to the providers to get there with us. So that's another proposal that you probably have heard already as well. There's different proposals on the child care tax credit, which builds on the dependent care tax credit that's existent. So those are the things that I'm working on the early childhood side, education side. On the higher ed, which is, again, the link, my focus has been on a bill to allow for disclosure for private loan that are being given to students. We know that students, once they graduate, they go to college and further their education, and they end up sometimes taking private loans and end up in huge debt. Our average for debt for students is more than $30,000 after they're completing school. So it's a big burden for them. So we want to make sure we educate these young learners once they're moving to higher ed on the consequences of those loans, what the responsibilities are, and that we're transparent as possible as we can be. So those are the areas, again, that I'm working on the education bucket, from early childhood all the way to higher ed. And thank you for being here again and for listening to us for this early morning on a Saturday.
Thank you. Representative Paul Rosenthal.
Thank you for having me. This is a great event, and I'm happy to be here. I serve on the Higher Ed Committee, the Public Safety and Finance Committee, and the Aging and Long-Term Care Committee. With that said, in education, I've always been very interested in early ed, and while the governor, excuse me, it's been a long week. While the governor has proposed universal pre-K for everybody, I think in theory, that's a great idea, but I personally would like to see that money more targeted to the people that need it the most. We don't have unlimited funds, so that money, in my opinion, should go to the learners who absolutely we need to capture and get them ready for kindergarten. On the higher ed side, and also, I'm sponsoring bills that add more money to the formula. There's lots of different things out there. Testing is something that I see up there. My wife actually is an IT para in an elementary school, and she is just administrating tests for the next 7 weeks. And after that, she does the MAP tests for another 7 weeks. And in my opinion, we're testing kids way too often and not necessarily in the right direction. I think the measures of academic progress is the way to go, because not all kids learn at the same time at the same rate. And that's actually a better way to look at their progress. On the higher ed side, there's lots of things going on. At the last meeting, I found out about the Bloomington Career Center, which I was unaware of, and actually had the opportunity to go over and talk to Tom and see what was planned. And so I've been very interested in working not only with universities, but also with school systems to make sure that we are capturing kids, whether it's in manufacturing. There's a lot of jobs out there right now that are going unfilled that are skilled manufacturing jobs that pay well. And, it's my belief that not everybody has to go to 4 years of traditional college, and that there's some better models out there where we can actually help kids when they're in school with partnerships with business and the MINSCU system to get them prepared to graduate and have a job waiting for them when they graduate, which I think is a really good model. Also on the higher ed side of it, we're looking at freezing tuition at the university for another 2 years. We did that in the last session. Senator Franzen said it well. We have kids graduating with way, way too much debt, and it's not sustainable. So we're looking at ways, along with Representative Slocum, to not only the PSEO model, but other models to get kids that are in the K through 12 system college credit while they're in school. And I think that is a very important step in starting to reduce tuition if they can get credit while in high school. I think that's a great model, and it sets them up to succeed, and it takes some of the burden off the families and the students.
Okay. Thank you. We're going to continue with Representative Ann Linczewski.
Oh, well, thank you. First of all, good morning, and thank you, Chair Bartolotta and Director Corman, and of course, all the directors who are here, and Superintendent and Cabinet, and of course, the public. So nice to be here on a Saturday morning and talk about education a little bit. I think, folks who know what I work on at the Capitol mostly know I've never served on the K-12 committees, and I probably never will, honestly. We tend to sort of specialize in certain areas. However, I am sponsoring a number of pieces of legislation that the schools care about, like increasing the per pupil funding. And for the public, that's really the thing that's kind of the big package of the money is the per pupil funding. And that's really when we talk about putting money on the formula. You hear legislators say that, that's what they mean. And so that's, a head count sort of revenue mechanism so that all children are receiving funds from the state legislature no matter where they are. I'm also co-sponsoring some of the legislation that's already been talked about in the early childhood area. I'll leave it to my colleagues who are the experts in these areas to sort it out with the governor and the House to figure out what we're really going to achieve there. But probably most important to me in the K-12 area is actually a number of things that are going on in the tax committee. And they're not directly K-12 bills necessarily, but they are anti-poverty measures. And really, the majority of the research I've read shows that the achievement gap is really an issue of poverty. And it really takes place before the kids enter the schools. And so we have in the tax code, and the governor is enhancing, and we've tried this before, to increase what's called the working family credit. So for folks who may not know what that is, it's basically a tax transfer of income to people who work. So, people like to think of it as welfare, but it's not. You have to work to receive the working family credit. So it's to help working families in poverty fund the needs of a family. We have the dependent care credit, which the governor is pursuing heavily this year. It's his top priority, and that will help families also in poverty and the middle class to be able to afford to have their children receive care so that they can work, and their kids will also be getting more ready for school in that situation. Minnesota leads the nation in the amount of two-parent earner families. So there is no state other than Minnesota that has a higher percentage of parents with children under the age of 18 in the workforce. So, that just tells us, you can have an opinion about that, but the overwhelming majority of women and men with children work. And the dependent care credit would allow those families to be able to afford their daycare situation. It also is for dependents, so a lot of the disabled and the elderly people caring for an older parent. So that's his top priority, and that's in the tax code. He's also the governor, and those of us who are in the tax area are looking at an enhancement to the current K-12 credit system. It's a tax credit system that's both a deduction and a credit. I won't get into the details on that, but put y'all to sleep on a Saturday morning, but they are relevant. And I think we will see a big debate about them in the tax committee because how they're structured can be very, very, very controversial. In fact, Governor Carlson spent, before I was a legislator, it kind of went to war with the legislature over the K-12 credit. And so the issue around that really revolves is, should a tax credit paid for by the public pay for private school tuition? So for many, this is a way that the public is funding the private schools. And for others, it's a fairness issue. And so we're having that debate again right now in the Minnesota House in the tax committee. So, we'll be continuing to work on that. I'm carrying a lot of bills that aren't in the K-12 area for Bloomington. I won't go into those, but they're in all kinds of different areas. So please contact me if you want to talk to me about that. But I think I'll finish my comments for now to talk about, I think in K-12, the House is really having to spend its time stopping ideas that I don't think are so great for the schools. That's my personal opinion, and legislators do two things. They try to get things passed, and they try to kill ideas they don't agree with. So your time is spent doing both. So in the House this year, in the area of education, the majority of my time will be spent trying to kill ideas I don't support, and I'll just mention a few to you. Kind of overwhelmingly, the move is on in the House to take from the suburbs and give to greater Minnesota from the school system. So there's lots of ways that's going to happen, lots of formula changes, lots of levy changes. We already do what's called the Gen Ed levy, which means based on property wealth, we give money from wealthier districts to poorer districts, and I think that's fair, and we have that system. So if you live in the Twin Cities, you pay a lot more for schools than you get back in the formula. And there is a move to dramatically increase that. The House flipped majorities based on rural members winning across greater Minnesota, and all their bills are really looking to take from places like Bloomington and ship it out to other places. So look for a lot of work in the House to stop some of those initiatives. There is also a move to change the compensatory revenue formula, which I'm sure we'll hear about that here today, and that's a big deal for the people of Bloomington if they understood how that worked. And I know your cabinet and superintendent can walk people through that if they want to understand it. There hasn't been a bill on this yet, but a number of legislators have talked in tax committee about removing the alternative facilities levy. Again, kind of dry for the citizenry who may be watching, but it's something that Bloomington in particular is a huge beneficiary of. That's a levy that's only afforded a small amount of school districts, and you have to have a certain amount of buildings to qualify to impose that levy. And so some people would like to remove that. I already talked about the K-12 credit, just two more, and again, you can see how taxes is linked to K-12. One is, and I think we will see this pass in the House, and it might even pass in the Senate, and I think, we'll all be hoping the governor will stop it, but I think it'll definitely pass in the House, and that is what's called cutting the statewide CI business property tax, and CI means commercial industrial. That tax, people know the property tax is a local tax, that when you pay your property taxes, the city of Bloomington is taxing you, the school district is taxing you, the Met Council is taxing you, the Hennepin County districts is taxing the mosquito control district, but the state isn't. So when you get your property taxes, the one group that's not taxing you is the state of Minnesota, except for we tax the business community on what we call the statewide CI business property tax, and that was set up to help fund the schools. So that's not in statute. It was originally, but with the actual dedication was removed, but people understand it as a tax to fund the general fund for the schools. So there's a huge move to cut that tax dramatically, which would be a huge loss in revenue to the public schools across the state. And it is an absolute top priority for the Minnesota House this year. So a bunch of us are working hard to stop that. And then the other one is, and you may have read about this one a little bit about in the paper, again, this is a rural phenomenon. The property tax chair in the House wants to do what he's calling, help the farmers, which is code for make them not pay for the schools. So there's a huge initiative in the House as well to remove a number of sorts of properties off the way we calculate the state general funding for schools. In Bloomington, people might think, well, we don't have farms, we don't care. Well, the bulk of your money for the Bloomington schools doesn't come from the property tax, it comes from the state legislature. And if we remove all the farmers from the property tax, or from the system that pays for schools, and some are proposing cabin owners, and then I already mentioned businesses, you can imagine the state pot for funding just shrinks. So while I, again, don't serve on the committee, we are spending a lot of time on tax issues that will dramatically affect funding for the Bloomington School District. So I'll end with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Melissa Halverson-Winkler.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, or thank you, Ms. Corman. And at first, I just want to say thank you for the public and members of the school board for having this event again. And thank you to the legislative committee, Director Corman and Bennett and Steigoff for organizing this. And I'm really happy to be here and happy to talk about education. We just finished the deadline for the omnibus education policy bill yesterday, and so everything is quite fresh in my mind about what we've been working on in that committee. I serve on the Education Policy Committee and Education Finance Committee. It's combined into one committee this biennium. And so we've been working a lot on the policy, as I mentioned, because of the deadline yesterday. But we've also been hearing finance bills as well. I'm also on the Health and Human Services and Housing Policy Committee, and it gives me a chance to work on not only education directly related programs, but also on child-related programs that have to do with health and human services. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about some on each side of that aisle. One bill that I've chief authored this year has to do with family home visiting and providing some money for the coalition of home visiting programs to develop some program standards. I think family home visiting is another way to reach out to high-risk families who need additional services and help with parenting and getting connected to social services. So I think it's a real effective way to reach these families, and this would give the coalition a way to develop some standards to use across the state. So that's in the human services area. Also, I've chief authored a bill to provide additional funding for school-linked mental health grants, as Representative Slocum mentioned that as well. I think that's an effective way to help kids with issues they have that are not just school-related, but I think the school is a good place to connect families to mental health resources. And I am also a sponsor of a bill on the education side, to increase the formula. I think that is a key need for school districts. We have seen the formula increase very slightly over the past, decade, but it really hasn't been enough to keep up with the inflationary increases that school districts have to deal with. They don't get a chance to say, well, we want to put that on hold because the inflationary increase on hold because we can't pay for it. So they have to continue to deal with their increased costs, and I think we need to put additional money in the formula. I have also been a co-sponsor of a bill to provide additional counselors and support workers, funding for that. We haven't had a hearing on it yet. I think we will have a hearing next week on this bill. But it would be a way for school districts to receive, it would be matching money, but it would provide funds for, I think, multiple disciplines, social workers, counselors, whatever type of personnel the school districts feel they need. I think there's a huge need in the area to fund counselors for school counselors, but I think school districts know best, how to, what positions they most need to fill. So that proposal is moving forward. And then also I will just touch on the student school board. I'm a co-author on that bill. Senator Torres Ray is the chief author, and we haven't had a hearing on it yet in the Senate, but I'm sure we will have one in the next couple weeks. Also, I've chief authored bills relating to compensatory revenue, the way school districts can use their compensatory revenue, and I see that on the agenda later, so I won't go into great detail on that. And also the English language learners to increase funding, the ability for students to remain in the English learner program for 7 years, which would provide school districts with some additional funding for those students. I wanted to comment also on testing. We had a lot of discussion and debate in the committee this week about the governor's proposal for reducing some of the standardized testing requirements. I have support the concept that you've brought forward in your legislative priorities to move to using the map. I don't see that as something that's going to happen this session, but I think we've had discussion about it, and we will continue to have discussion about it. I have supported what the governor proposed and what's in the education policy bill regarding testing. His proposal makes optional a couple of the years of MCI testing. I think people have concern about that, about reducing the number, but I think we need to give local districts more options in terms of what they feel is the best way to gather the testing information from their students. And this would be a way to do that. They would be able to have the MCA tests each year if they choose to, but if they would prefer to focus on using the MAP test, they would have that option also. So I think it may help to reduce the numbers of tests that are given. In other areas, I will be watching the alternative school funding or school facility funding discussions. And when I was on the board here, we made took steps to really put a 10-year plan in place to utilize the alternative facilities formula, and I think that's benefited Bloomington to be able to do that. And I know there are many districts that are in dire need of facilities funding, so we will continue to have more discussions about how to make that possible for other districts to address their building needs. I share the concern Representative Lincheski stated about changes in funding formulas that will have a benefit for greater Minnesota, but I am very concerned if they have a more negative effect on districts like Bloomington, and I will try to speak up because I think there's a movement in the Senate to make some of that happen as well, so we'll be watching that. And then in the area of teacher evaluation, I hope that we will be able to secure more funding for teacher evaluation that allows us to continue the current funding formula for QComp, but also recognizes the need of districts that aren't participating in that program, but still need to provide comprehensive evaluations for their teachers. So that proposal or that bill will probably be heard next week, and we'll have some discussion about how to best do that. As you've heard so far, there's many requests for funding, and there's obviously not enough money to fill all of them, and so the next month we'll definitely see more discussion about how do we prioritize and whose interests get prioritized, and it'll be interesting times, and look forward to more discussion, and I appreciate being able to hear your priorities here today so that we can be good advocates at the Capitol. So thank you.
Well, thank you, and we really appreciate all the hard work that you're doing right now and bringing us this kind of information today too. It's really important for all of us in the community to know. And yeah, thank you very much. And thanks for your continued support of education and the Bloomington schools. Now I'd like to ask board members if you have any questions or any comments that you briefly would like to share. Who would like to go?
I'll
yes.
lean into the mic. First, let me say thank you to all our legislators for coming out early in the morning. I know I'm excited for these days. I was up early this morning getting ready. I'm sure it shows. So I have a real quick question. I'm interested in knowing how a bill is formed. What's the genesis? I know you have tons of extra time and you're just sitting around twiddling your thumbs trying to figure out what to do, but how do you come up with language? How do you form the bills that you write? And you can all jump in, or just one of you. I know you're anxious to answer that particular question, but what's the process for putting together a bill?
I can give the freshman perspective, at least in my 2 years there, and especially on a tax issue that I'm not an expert on, but I had the idea to do something about the child care tax credit. So we have staff, we have both partisan and nonpartisan staff, and they provide great research across the country and the state. So in this particular case, I brought the idea, they gave me the research, I looked at all the models in different states, saw Louisiana was doing something very similar to where I thought Minnesota can go. They had a similar parent-aware system in their rated program, and it's a process. And then you meet with council, you put the language together, you finesse it to meet Minnesota language and standards. But yeah, not having the experience that Representative Lincheski has in taxes, they do help you a lot in terms of hand-holding you, in terms of understanding all the different elements of a tax that you have to address. How do you want to deal? Are you going to cap income? Are you going to what rate are you going to set? How much revenue is it needed to provide for that? So it's been an interesting process. Now I have an amendment to it, so I have to figure that out as well. So at least that's been my experience when it's coming from our own initiative. But a lot of bills do come from advocates, whether it's trade association that comes and brings the bill, like Ed Minnesota, or any other Epilepsy Foundation. All these groups have their priorities and legislative priorities for the year, and they bring those ideas to you. Sometimes they bring you the language. A lot of times that's what happens. And then you agree with carrying the bill and making changes along the way. But that's two different ways of how I've been exposed to it. For my first year, it was crazy. It was, we'd had the House, the Senate, and the governor in the same party, and everyone was throwing bills left and right. So it's a very hectic process at the beginning, and then you have to go through the legislative process of getting your bills heard in committee. So it can be a lot of juggling along the way, but essentially that's how I got started.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions directly related to what we have heard today so far? Yes, Director Steiger.
Yes, I just have a question for Representative Slocum. We heard a lot of discussion after she spoke about early childhood, and, we realized there's several different ideas out there about how to best fund early childhood, but she talked about that she had a bill for flexibility and pre-K funds, so I just wanted to see if she could explain a little bit more about that one also.
Yeah, maybe. Thank you, thank you for the question. There was a bill presented, and I thought it made really good sense for the school readiness and the early childhood. With education funding, one of the most frustrating things is there are silos of money, and never can the silos commingle. And there's accountability for each silo, making it, I think, particularly hard for school board members and school districts to function very effectively, or as effectively as they could. This bill allows the early childhood and the school readiness funding to be able to be moved by school districts. That's if it passes and if it gets signed by the governor. I mean, there's still process ahead. Just because the House is making noises doesn't make it a law. But that they could use the silos in a way that's most effective for their district. In other words, move money from one silo to another silo to work the best for their district. Makes good sense to me.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to provide opportunity for more questions and comments, but I think we're just going to continue with our agenda for today because we want to be respectful to everybody's time. We don't want to go over time towards the end. Okay, well, now we are going to move to proposed legislation discussion of today's forum. And we have with us today staff experts from our Bloomington School District who will take a few minutes each to share insights on pending bills and their potential impact on Bloomington Public Schools. After each expert testimony, we're going to invite our legislators to ask questions or comments on areas of interest we support in this year's legislative session. We're going to start first with Mr. Eric Melby, Director of Student Services.
Thank you, Chair Bartolotta, Director Corman, Superintendent Fujitaki, board members, and assembled legislators. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you this morning and for coming in, as everybody's pointed out, early on a Saturday morning. Thank you. In the realm of special education, and I'm finding it very interesting in preparing to talk to you this morning, trying to keep track as things happen in St. Paul, and that's a challenge, so thank you for the work you do there. That's hard to keep up with. In special education, recently both the Bloomington Federation of Teachers President Wendy Marchek and myself have met with Senator Wickland within the last month or so to discuss special education workload issues and possible ways to deal with them. And I just want to say we sincerely appreciate the attention being given to that particular issue. There is some proposed legislation currently, House File 964, that aims to help alleviate some of the paperwork burden on special ed teachers by mandating that MDE form a task force or a committee of some kind to study paperwork efficiency issues and then provide technical assistance to districts. That could be helpful. Any way that we can help special ed teachers with the paperwork issue would be appreciated. And that, I believe, will require some work with the Department of Education in terms of how the monitoring process happens and rules come out from the Department of Ed. It's really hard to keep up with changes, and then teachers have to be trained on what the new changes are, and it just kind of is a snowball rolling down a hill when it comes to paperwork. And they would much rather spend time in front of kids teaching than working on paperwork. The paperwork and due process is important, I get that, but if we could figure out a way to balance that a little better would be wonderful. There is also current House File 804, which talks about the state online IEP system, which I believe was approved last session, and it would make it an opt-in at this point for districts. I believe Commissioner Casilius and the MDE are supportive of that opt-in part of the legislation. Bloomington would be supportive of that as well. I see a benefit to a statewide system in terms of portability of data. I also don't think it will reduce paperwork for teachers. So if people think that having a statewide IEP system will reduce the paperwork burden, I don't think it will, actually. Also in special education, House File 1237 proposes some mandated training for paraprofessionals before they start work in specific disability areas. That's would be wonderful. Nobody would argue that that's not a good idea. However, I do have concerns if there's any fundings to go along with that mandate. So just to keep that in mind. And then finally, in the special ed realm, I understand that Governor Dayton, if I'm keeping up with things, has proposed using up to $40 million of the surplus to support special ed funding and reduce the cross-subsidy. Anything we can do to help support special ed funding, it's an expensive programming for students, and to reduce that cross-subsidy and burden on the general fund for districts would be appreciated, obviously. In terms of English learner legislation, a lot of work was done last session. The LEAPS Act shined a bright light on EL issues and how we can help attend to those in districts. We, like other districts, are now figuring out how to best implement the provisions of that act. We certainly appreciate the increase in funding. After talking to Senator Wickland this morning, I understand that there probably will be some proposed language to increase funding again from 6 to 7 years for EL students. That would be helpful for us in Bloomington, as we have a number of long-term EL students who we continue to serve even though we don't have funding for those students. So that would be wonderful. We would also support the bilingual seal language in terms of recognizing students from other countries that have the dual languages, and honoring that and respecting that and celebrating that, frankly. And I believe, if I'm right, that the Senate Omnibus Bill as currently proposed, or I'm sorry, Senate File 1237 proposes to extend the current one-year exemption for new EL students to this country on taking state assessments. It would be wonderful to increase that exemption. It just seems unfair to me to have students that are that new to country taking our assessments and going through that process. That being said, I know time is limited, so that would be my take on the current state of affairs in terms of special education and EL legislation. I'm happy to try to answer any questions you might have.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. My question, Mr. Melby, is what is your population for EL and special ed respectively, and how much funding do you have per pupil on those two areas? Every district does it differently and compensates with general funds as well. So what's the landscape here in Bloomington?
Well, the landscape in terms of numbers is roughly 1,500 special ed students in the district, and roughly 1,300 EL students in the district. In terms of the per pupil funding part, I don't want to give you a wrong answer. I don't know off the top of my head, because there's a lot that goes into that, as you pointed out.
Yes.
Thank you, Director Corman. I do have a question, but it might not, you might not be able to answer it, and if the answer is later, that's fine, and it might be, I mean, I'm just looking, you know, maybe it's an interdisciplinary question within all your areas for either Mr. Holton or Mr. Heisted or yourself, the superintendent. You know, one thing I've thought about with Bloomington is since President Obama issued his executive order making a lot of newer Americans permanent citizens, has the Bloomington School District gone through the process of trying to project how many people who are not legal citizens in Bloomington now will become legal citizens in Bloomington? And will that affect any of, you know, the pots of money and the formulas? Will Bloomington receive some more monies in some of these areas? Any idea? Because I think as we see that executive order play through, we're going to see a lot of people become citizens right here in Bloomington.
I'm very thankful you gave me a number of opportunities to opt out of answering that question, because I don't think I have an answer to that. But it's a great question, and we can certainly do some research on that and get back to you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Any other comments, questions? Yes, Senator Wickland.
Thank you, Ms. Corman. I just wanted to make a comment about a couple things that you mentioned. The last proposal that you meant in the bill to reduce the number of years of testing for the students who have been here in schools 2 years or less. We had a real, very lively discussion about that yesterday in our policy committee. And the proposal, I don't think will move forward this year. I think it came to the committee very late, and we didn't have a full hearing on it, and it really needs kind of its own full discussion. And so this was just part of a small part of our omnibus policy bill discussion. I think it has a lot of merit. There are a lot of arguments that people say, well, we should be collecting this testing information about all kids, even if they aren't able to pass the test. But I don't see that is really providing us with useful information, and I think it can have a lot of negative impacts on the students who are, doing their best and learning a full new language, and trying to also grasp the reading and math skills that we're teaching them. And I think it's really unrealistic to say that they should be tested just like all the other students who have been here and speak the language fluently. So I hope that we bring that back for discussion next year and really put some emphasis on, how can we rationally get good information that we need that helps teachers, but not be testing students and really causing them a lot of negative feelings on themselves for not being able to achieve something that's unrealistic. So.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Senator Wickland. And yes,
Thank you.
Representative
I just
Rosenthal.
have a quick comment. And, the governor has been stated to put 40 million into special ed. Special ed is something that's been neglected for a long time and places a huge burden on districts. You have these mandates and you don't have the funding, so I am glad that we're finally addressing that, although probably not enough to cover the need. Also, the exemption for English language teachers, I think, is a very smart idea. And as Representative Lancheski said, there's certain times when you want to kill bills, and there have been bills that would get rid of this exemption, and we're fighting hard to keep it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Next, we have Assistant Superintendent Chris Lennox.
All right, thank you, Director Corman, Superintendent Fujitaki, legislators, members of the board. Today, briefly, I just want to speak in support of one particular bill, and that's Senate File 558. We do have the chief author of that bill with us today, Senator Melissa Wickland. This bill provides greater flexibility for districts with our compensatory revenue. Why is that important? Well, to achieve the expectations the legislature has set out on the world's best workforce, school districts have to create systems. You can't leave that to the individual school to do. Districts have to look at that comprehensively. Bloomington's embraced the world's best workforce legislation and created pathways to graduation for our students. And it's our intention to meet the needs of all learners, birth to adult. Again, to do that, we need to create structures and systems. The flexibility that this legislation or the change in legislation provides allows us to meet the needs at a site level, at our school level. All of our schools have needs, they just don't have the same proportionality of need at each site. So more flexibility to meet those needs is important. And we appreciate this legislation because it will allow us to do just that, to create the structures and systems across Bloomington to meet the needs of all of our learners. So in closing for my part, I want to encourage support of this bill and specifically thank Senator Wickland for authoring this and give her the opportunity if there's specific things about the bill she'd like to share as the chief author.
Thank you, Assistant Superintendent and Ms. Corman. I think that the bill has a great chance of getting into the education finance omnibus bill. We had discussions this week about putting it in the policy bill, and we're going to go forward with that, but we're told that the finance committee feels that it has a financial component, and it would have to go in the finance bill. So that being said, I will be continuing to advocate for it to go into that bill, and I think that the chair has indicated that he will do that. I'm not sure if it has been heard in the House, so if not, I think it's still, once it's in the finance omnibus bill, many things happen in the conference committee and proposals get accepted. I think that this proposal has an advantage. It isn't asking for additional funding. It's really asking for flexibility, and so I think it has a better chance of being enacted because of that, and I hope that the discussions I have will continue to move that forward. So thanks for bringing it up, and I appreciate your coming to testify. We had great testimony from Richfield and Bloomington at our hearing, and I think that was very, had a lot of impact on the committee members, so I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wickland. Anybody else? Any questions or comments? No?
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, with no questions, then we'll move to invite Dr. David Heista, Director of Research and Assessment.
Thank you, Chair Corman and legislators, board members. I want to briefly kind of give an update on where the reduction of testing is at on the two bills. The governor's proposal is in the Senate Policy Bill 1451, and basically would eliminate testing for 8th grade, 10th grade, and what's called the Compass Diagnostic Test. And on the House side, the proposal coming out of the task force for reduction of testing does the same thing. So the Explore and Plan tests are actually being sunsetted by the company that makes them. The test wouldn't be available in 2 years. My concern in that area is that we have great need to do assessment of vocational interest, and I talked to the director of testing for the state yesterday, and she said there is a commitment to find some form of interest inventory with the Explore and Plan. So that's likely to happen since it's in both bills. Also in both bills is the continuation of ACT testing for all, the college readiness assessment, and I believe in the Senate bill it says either grade 11 or grade 12. So the state would continue to pay for ACT testing. The big difference, as has been mentioned already, is the MCA 3 tests. Now these are the high standards tests that really are calibrated above grade level. And they've been used not only for indicating our accountability within the state, but also for various projects to reduce the achievement gap. And so in the Senate bill, grade 3 and 4 MCA math tests would be eliminated, along with grade 6 and 7 reading tests. Now, these would be made optional, but if few schools decided to opt into those tests, they wouldn't be able to be used on a statewide basis for comparisons. And I think it will likely impact our waiver. I think the commissioner is more optimistic that they can get through the waiver committee than I am. Basically, the reduction of those tests means that Bloomington would rely even more on the MAP test. As been mentioned, the MAP test has the qualities of being a really strong assessment for kids who are doing very well, gifted students, and also for special needs students, special ed and ELL students. It provides growth across time and provides a way for us to to calibrate whether students are on track for various pathways in post-secondary. So, Bloomington can live with either one of these bills, but on the House side, they keep all grades 3 through 8 for MCA testing, I think, assuming that the waiver's going to demand that. So it'll be very interesting to see how this plays out. I was concerned that the original House bill included a proposal to have a cut score on the MCA tests, and the MCA is being way above grade level. If you set a cut score, for example, at proficiency level on that test, half of our current seniors wouldn't graduate. And so if this happens to come back in at some point, I would encourage legislators to try to eliminate that kind of a proposal. What I seem to be agreeing on is to set college and career benchmarks going back to early grades, similar to what we've done in Bloomington with the MAP test. So we know in grade 3 where you have to be on course and eventually get into a 4-year college or a 2-year college, and that's the kind of work that the state is committed to doing. So basically, I think Bloomington and other districts in the state who use the MAP will be fine with either of these bills as they rely on their MAP testing, but I'm concerned about districts that don't currently have the MAP test. They would not assess math until 5th grade. And similar to reading, if you haven't got the basics in mathematics by 5th grade, you can have huge gaps, and some districts might be unaware of those gaps. That's what I had in my prepared notes. I'm glad to take any questions.
Yes, Representative Slocum.
Dr. Heisted, can you, from your professional vantage point, what would be the pluses and minuses of using the ACT test?
The ACT is the college entrance test that's accepted by virtually every college in the Midwest. Now, Eastern schools, Western schools may require the SAT. The MCA scores at high school really aren't paid much attention to by higher ed. And so it was the opinion of the task force that put this in place was this is a test that many students are going to need for college entrance, and it's accepted by 2-year colleges as well. And so the ACT seemed to be a test that had a good purpose. There are some that would like to eliminate the MCA at 10th and 11th grade because we have the ACT. We also have MAP testing in high school. And if I were to choose between MCAs at high school and the ACT, I think I would go with the ACT. The ACT had a big validity study that was conducted to show where you would have to be on track to get a B or better your freshman year in math or in reading. And folks are still using that as kind of the high college readiness benchmark. And then a number of us have done work to try to calibrate to the ACT so that we can have pathways that start all the way from kindergarten and go up to 12th grade. So I'm in favor of keeping it. There are some students that aren't prepared for the ACT, and there's a work keys assessment that has been used in the past. There are other appropriate assessments for students that shouldn't take the ACT. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Questions, comments? No? Thank you, Dr. Heistad. And I'd like to invite now Mrs. Kelly Spees, QCOM Coordinator.
Thank you, Director Corman, school board members, and legislators. It's really nice to hear from the legislators. I not only am a teacher and I coordinate the teacher evaluation program here in Bloomington, but I'm also a part of the Planning Commission. So I know Representative Lincheski and I have a lot of shared interest about keeping our whole community healthy, because we know if we have a healthy city, we will have a healthier school system as well. So back in August, Brenda Casilius charged a committee of about 20 to 25 school board members, teachers, representatives, senators, superintendents from all across the state of Minnesota to look at the teacher evaluation law, but also to look at our quality compensation program that had been sponsored for about the last 12 years here in Minnesota. The charge was to look at maintaining one or the other or melding the two. Well, it was very clear that what we wanted to do is to take the best of both and put it together in recommendations to deliver to the House and to the Senate. So that's what we did. And putting charter school members, school districts from outstate that don't have the students or the teacher capacity that we have in the metro area with metro area districts, and to put together 11 recommendations to go forward was very difficult. But we felt very good about the process, and I think Representative Slocum can speak to the integrity of the work and putting together consensus with such a diverse voice in education across the entire state. Currently, right now, there is a Senate File 1124 that was brought forward, and by and large, all the recommendations were accepted pretty much as is. The concern that we have as I think statewide, but specifically here in Bloomington, is that we keep the integrity of the QComp program. The Department of Education really had high standards for our original application, and the high standards were around teacher evaluation and that job-embedded professional development. We want to maintain those standards because we know that teachers have high standards for themselves and for the students in their class. So we want to maintain that. By maintaining that, we want those teacher leadership positions, the peer review process to be maintained, new teacher mentoring, which we're very fortunate in Bloomington to have a very strong program, that job-embedded professional development, those performance incentives, and just a robust system of teacher leadership within a district. The funding recommendations, I was very happy to hear Senator Wickland say that it looks like the districts that have been in QComp are going to be able to maintain that funding. We built our entire program around that funding. We have currently 11 coaches working in Bloomington with our 860 teachers, and to take any of that away would really teeter a very strong teacher evaluation program and the law that's gone into effect this year. So we support the continuation of that funding for QComp districts, but also support our friends that probably didn't have the capacity to put together the application for that compensation. Currently in the Senate Finance Bill, we're looking at $50 per pupil for those other districts, and I think the desire is to graduate more money in over time. So we want to maintain what we have here in Bloomington, but we also want a very strong state in terms of teacher evaluation and professional development, so we support that continued funding. And I'll take any questions you have.
Representative Slocum.
Thank you. I just think you should know that your own Ms. Spies was co-chair of the committee and did an excellent job chairing this committee. And it really was a broad spectrum of people, and that's what was most interesting. You had little town, their districts represented, you had urban districts represented, you had charter schools represented, you had all kinds of different perspectives, and we hashed through and got through, and I think it's pretty good. I'm happy with it. I wish I could say that we were jumping over all the hoops and doing everything we could at the House level, but we're not. So I'm happy to see that it's moving in the Senate, because that means it'll move ultimately. It also came with a very hefty price tag. And I think when we got the price tag, we knew it would be probably implemented in increments. And and over time.
Right.
So,
Thank you.
thank you. You should be very proud of this woman.
Thank you.
She was great, just great.
I work to bring people to consensus very often, but they're usually people I know quite well. So it was really interesting to have a group of people that I didn't know at all and have to draw that consensus. And also to keep the standards very high and to keep the communication very clear about what we were trying to achieve for the students in Minnesota. So thank you for that. I'm glad we achieved it.
Well, you weren't exactly working with mild and meek people there.
No.
It was a fairly opinionated crowd, and so you did just a fabulous job.
Thank you.
I was so proud. I'm like, yeah, I represent Bloomington.
Hey, Bloomington.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? No? Thank you, Mrs. Lees.
Thank you.
And our last presenter will be Mr. Tom Holton.
Mary.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm missing Mary. Sorry. Okay. Our next presenter is Mary Burks, and she's the Director of Human Resources. And we talked so much about, how I was going to pronounce your last name that I almost passed. Sorry.
Well, for a minute there, I was like, oh, okay, that's fine, that's great. Okay, thank you, Director Corman, members of the school board, and legislators. I'm here to talk about last in, first out, and to kind of just highlight some things that I see. Obviously, last in, first out moves away, or forces districts to move away from seniority-based layoff systems. So it gives a wider perspective than just looking at seniority when you're going through layoff. I think everyone knows that seniority is based on years of experience within a unit, not necessarily years of experience of teaching. So as teachers go to school, for whatever reason they choose to do that, their seniority starts over. So I think the one thing I do want to point out is seniority doesn't equate to years of experience or necessarily effectiveness. So in that aspect, I think the bill is starting to move in a good direction. Due to past legislation, schools now have to bargain their evaluation tool with the unit. So there should be agreement in schools currently about the evaluation tool that they're using, because that has to be jointly bargained. So that's another positive, because everybody's familiar with that evaluation tool that they are using. However, it doesn't really address some potential issues that may exist with evaluation, including the validity of the evaluation that they're using, inter-rater reliability. There's a whole bunch of pieces that go into evaluation that, we're not looking at in this bill. Another potential that I see is it does require the most recent evaluation to be used as a determining factor, as well as other locally determined factors. That's a really broad phrase. It doesn't define, and I'm not sure what direction it's going as far as what is the most recent evaluation. Does that mean the most recent summative evaluation? Because that's, you have to do that 1 in 3 years. Or is that most recent period? Because there's also peer evaluations going on that are occurring on the off years, the other 2 years. And depending on which way you look at that, the evaluation is already 2 or 3 years old at that point. So if you've had any coaching opportunity on an evaluation, hopefully the teacher has improved since then. But the bill doesn't address any way to look at that improvement over that time period. If you are saying the most recent and you require peers and use the peer evaluation that's going on, I think that may hamper that dynamic relationship in the peer evaluation system. Right now, they feel safe to be able to tell each other things, to give feedback, to give supports and development to their coworkers. If you make that a high-stakes evaluation, I think that whole feeling and network would change. So I do want to point out that. So I think there's some language in the bill itself that could be updated. Also, looking at most recent, I do want to comment on that as well. Sometimes, I think it's well known, teachers don't control the input into their classrooms. We are servicing many different people, many different backgrounds. I prefer to look at a more longer viewpoint of teachers' effectiveness and how they're performing rather than just a snapshot. Because unless you know how to norm that classroom correctly or see all of the factors that go into that evaluation over time, you might make a judgment based on a year that they just, every teacher has a blip year now and then. So I think you also have to look at a bigger picture. So I'm not sure that using 1 year of an evaluation as that determination is the best way to do that. So those are things that I would throw out for consideration. And if you have questions, I would certainly be welcome to answer them.
Yes, go ahead, Representative Slocum.
Thank you. I think the LIFO is, it's reared its ugly head for a number of years.
Yep.
It's going to continue to rear its ugly head for a number of years. It's not going to go anywhere this year, I've been assured. The evaluations are just being rolled out. This is so premature to use evaluations, and it would be impossible to use them over time because many districts haven't even started using evaluations yet. And so there's no balance there. The other concern that was often raised was principals are given, and superintendents are given a budget. They're given a budget. They say, okay, this is your school, this is what you get this next year. Make your budget up. How can you guarantee that the more highly paid senior teacher who's been there longer doesn't get bumped to balance the books? I think there's just major concerns with this. The other thing is, as a teacher, as a longtime teacher, my first 3, I might even go 4 years teaching, were hardly great. I mean, you're getting to know a building, you're getting to know the students, you're figuring out what works for you, what doesn't work for you, you're trying to find curriculum. Heck, I had to bring in my own pencils and paper, and anyway, that's a whole different story. But you're finding your way. You're not necessarily the best teacher in the universe. And while not everyone is like me, my 2 daughters are teachers too, and they've said the same things. For the first couple of years, you're floundering around trying to figure out what you're doing. So it does take time to move into being effective as a teacher. However, that new teacher is the cheapest teacher. And what concerns me is the books will be balanced, because it always, the one thing I've learned at the legislature with education is money, follow the money. Money makes the world go round. I worry that the books will be balanced on the backs of more senior teachers. And when I brought that up in committee, I was told, well, there's a part in the bill that says they can't do that. Really? I'm sorry, but, and that was my response in committee too, is really, wow, that's great. I'm feeling so much better, but I really think this is a premature proposal, and my understanding is it's gonna go nowhere this year. Now, do I think, and have I advised Education Minnesota to sit down and start working on something in a proactive way? Because it's gonna come back. It'll be back next year and the year after and the year after. And at some point, it goes. It passes. So I've urged them, sit down, negotiate something you can live with. Something that works for not only the teachers' union, but also the districts, the MDE, everybody else. Something everybody can get on board with.
Yeah, I think using any one thing to determine that there's a danger to point to
Absolutely.
just one thing, whether it's seniority or evaluation or this or that. I think you have to look at a variety of things when you're looking at effectiveness and employment and what you need for your school. So,
Thank you. Yes, Representative Wincheski.
Thank you, Director Corman. And, I just want to jump in on this too, because the House already had the bruising, battle on the House floor. So we've already heard the bill. The House is done with it. It's on its way to the Senate. And the Senate, we don't know what they're going to do. I mean, Senator Wickland and Senator Franzen can tell us, we understand that Senator Bach has been pretty clear that, it's going to get a hearing, but then it's going to stay in committee, and that's it for the year. So at least that's what he's publicly saying, that the Senate isn't going to do anything with it. But that's really neither here nor there. I think at the end of the day, the key in all of this will be the governor, and I think people should think about that for a little bit. The governor just started his second term, so he's not going anywhere anytime soon. And just a little insight to the governor, he's a former teacher. So after he graduated from Yale, he taught in very disadvantaged schools in New York. And his very strong views about, kind of on both sides, he understands federal and state law regarding PELRA and collective bargaining and what that means. I think often our citizenry doesn't really know what those laws are about, but they protect groups of people to collectively bargain, meaning rather than every single teacher coming before the school board for their annual review, they work as a group. And so, we've got collective bargaining in this state, and so therefore there are different things at play here. But, I do want to mention, part of it is, the governor, I think, is key because he has signaled that he'd like some changes. And he is open-minded to the complaints that, at the risk of offending some, I'm open-minded to in that, as someone who graduated from the Bloomington schools, I've had 4 kids in the Bloomington schools, I can tell you just when you're out door knocking and when you're talking to parents, they want assurances that if there's a teacher that is ineffective, that something can be done. And there's a broad misunderstanding in the public that there is something that can be done. The public doesn't know that. And I think there is a burden to be placed on folks who don't want to see much change here to explain the current process and how parents can effectively deal with an ineffective teacher. I'm the student of a public school teacher, taught in the Edina schools for 32 years, and I understand kind of both sides here. As the parent consumer, they want to know, okay, that was a bad experience with that child that year, what's going to be done about that? And so there needs to be an education, I think, with the public about these issues, and it calls on the legislature and school districts to explain to its citizenry that there is a process and how does that process work. And I want to agree with Representative Slocum that this is not going away, and this governor is not going to change, and each year he gets a little more open to it. Yet on the flip side, the ageism question is very real, and people need to think long and hard about this. And when I talk to citizens, out door knocking or just in meetings, you would be amazed at, the majority of Bloomington residents who are seniors, which, by the way, is our largest group of Bloomington residents, who have great empathy for this issue for teachers, because while they're not in education, they know that it is federal law that protects them from being fired because they're 55 and somebody who's 25 can do the job for half the price. So when you think about that, we don't allow private employers to lay people off because of their age. That's illegal in this country. And there's lots of lawsuits about it when people try it. So I've been interested to watch older residents really resonate with what it means when you can be sort of in the prime of your career or older and be removed to balance the budget. I think that's a very real concern. So, I have, I can kind of empathize with everybody on this issue a little bit. I think I like Representative Slocum, think nothing's really going to change this year. But I think it's coming, and it really is in everyone's best interest for those who are advocating really for no change to really come forward and say, here's what we're going to do about it, so that everyone can feel good about it. Because, if it's not this governor, it's going to be the next governor. And I think there's a lot to be done here yet, that a lot of people have a lot of ideas, but it's just not going to gel into anything this year.
Thank you, Representative Chesky, and thank you to Mrs. Burris. And our last presenter now is Mr. Tom Holton, Director of Community Services.
Thanks for all being here this morning, and what I would say is continuing the conversation about early childhood. We're fortunate here in Bloomington because as I look around the room, I think either individually or by testimony in community or in the legislature this year, every single one of our representatives have seen me talking about early childhood or perhaps our college and career academy. So we're fortunate that our legislators just don't go there and do something, but they do have a dialogue with our community and our experts and try to work together. I could spend the full hour and a half, and that's maybe why they put me at the end, so I couldn't, talking just about all of the early childhood bills that are there. Senator Franzen and others have talked about. That is the topic. The time is now, and something is going to happen. We're at a point and I've been at this for about 40 years, we're at a point that we've never been before of understanding the importance of early childhood, and so everyone knows that we should do something, and it's critical now that we do our best to get it right. So I'm going to talk about trying to get it right from a Bloomington perspective, and reiterate some of the conversations we've had individually and in testimony before. So for about 10 years, Bloomington has been accelerating its efforts to assure that all learners are ready for K and on that critical path of being reading at grade level by 3rd grade. And we've gotten some state recognition and national recognition for the things that we've done. And although we haven't been completely successful, some of our strategies have been highly effective. And I think legislation ought to mirror what we've learned over those 10 years and try to replicate and fund what works here and across the state. And we've done that by providing a wide range of programs. In any point along the way in education, there isn't one problem or one solution, but all of the problems are dynamic and they take dynamic solutions. So I get frustrated when someone says, if we just spend a ton of money on that one single thing, we're going to solve the problem. So part of our strategy has been providing a wide range of programming for families prenatal to K, because education doesn't start or end at any one point, and you can't fix it in any one year along the way. So we provide a wide range of solutions so that parents can have choices and have the interventions and the programming that will make their individual child successful for that year and then for the years to come. And we've created programs and invested resources here in Bloomington to the children we think need them the most. We provide programming for all, but when we take state dollars or we take local dollars or we take district dollars, we invest them in those children that know by history are most likely not to succeed, either at kindergarten or all the way through our K-12 system. And we think as a public investment, that's where we get the best return. It would be nice if we lived in a day that we could fund everything, and as legislators, you know there is never enough to fund all education needs, let alone all the other needs. So I think it's wise, it's prudent, it's just really smart to invest where you get the best return, and I think that's investing at kids that are at risk. And I think because of this balanced approach, and the support by both the legislature, we'd always like you to support us a little more, and the investment by our school board that's really unprecedented in the state in investing in early childhood early, often, and for a long time now. We've moved into an unprecedented area in Bloomington of what we've accomplished. In a state and in a region where we still claim that as many as 50% of kids are not ready for kindergarten, and we have the research to show what happens when kids are not ready for kindergarten. Very unlikely that they will ever catch up. This year, 2014, we exceeded 90% of our kids in Bloomington being ready for kindergarten based on our early kindergarten assessment. We did that somewhat on a shoestring. There's a lot of pulling hats out of, or rabbits out of the hat to do that financially. But we have done that. We didn't do it overnight, but we've demonstrated some success. So in closing, I'd like to go back to some of those themes. As you go back and look at the whole wide range of bills from the governor to the Senate to the House, focus money, general money, universal, targeted. Consider the things that I think that have worked for us. One is a balanced approach that supports many options. So families can choose, and education can work with families. And that doesn't just include for schools. We don't do a lot of child care, but if you don't support CCAP and child care for poor families, they're going to spend an awful lot of time in non-quality care. So if that's the best way, and scholarships is the best way to fund that system, use scholarships gives those parents the choice to do that. But that won't solve the whole problem, because child care won't solve the problem. They can't. Allow flexibility. Give flexibility to the experts in school districts. We're not the only one that are having this kind of success. Don't hamper us with determining how many days, how many hours, what time kids need to go to school, what the curriculum is. Let the experts who've been working do that. Allow that flexibility. There's current legislation over 20 years old, school readiness, that already has accountability, already has flexibility that we use currently to get the success that we have, along with the early childhood family education money. And then finally, we do know what works. What's really been missing here in Bloomington to get at the problem sooner and to assure sustainability is fund what works. And so focus those resources in whatever bill you come forward. I would suggest in the current school readiness legislation, get that to school districts, fund CCAP, and help support individual private daycare along the way, because it's part of a system, all things that families need, and we'll continue to move the dial and assure that all kids are ready for K, reading at 3rd grade, and then getting on to successful college and career. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holton. We've gone over time, but if any of the legislators have question or comment.
Sure. Thank you, Director Corman. And Tom, I just want to say what a gem you are to this district and to the state as a whole. You know, I'm so proud of Bloomington. When I get to speak on early childhood issues, I always say that Bloomington is #1, and that's in large part due to you. And so I would continue to ask you to contact me or us when you see something that you like, and things that you might not like, because we can't be everywhere at once, and we really look to you, the expert, for guidance.
Thank you.
Yes, anybody else? Yes, Senator Holton.
Thank you, Director Corman. I just wanted to comment that in the Senate Education Committee, there's been a lot of discussion about what we think should move forward, and I think I hear a lot of others and myself that believe that the school readiness money increases would be a good way to direct some additional funding. Probably also looking at the early learning scholarships. I think your point about the daycare and CCAP funding, I think that's really important. Families need to have the ability to fill their child's time with quality care. So I think that sort of comprehensive approach, I think, is definitely under discussion in the Senate Education Committee. When it moves beyond that to what our leadership, higher leadership wants to pursue, I'm not sure how that's all going to come out. I think there's, as Senator Franson's indicated, we have proponents of different alternatives. So it'll be an interesting discussion as we go forward after our break.
Thank you. Okay, well, it seems like it's time to close our forum for today. But before I turn it over to our school board chair to close today's program, I'd like to say thank you to our Bloomington legislators and legislative committee and our district leadership for sharing your insights today. Also, people who are here in the audience, I can see there's parents and there's staff members and people who are watching from home too. And thank you to BEC TV for broadcasting this forum today.
Today has been a very good opportunity to hear from our legislators and discuss legislative proposals that we believe will have an impact on our district. I'd like to take this opportunity to once again thank our legislators for joining us this morning. We know you have very busy schedules right now, so we appreciate the time we've had today and look forward to your continued work in the House and the Senate. Thank you also to my fellow board members for their time and commitment to this important work, and for those staff and community members who joined us today. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you, Deb.